Hello, welcome to The Real Deal. I am Reil, and today we're going to be talking to Stewart McIntosh. And just so I'm 100% clear, your author name is G. Stewart McIntosh, just in case somebody's looking for your work. So we were looking at some of that on Amazon. So I don't want to start with the questions too generic, but we have a mutual friend who referred me to you. I don't want to give any names because I haven't asked her permission, but to do so.
She was a former student of mine.
Former student of yours. She says you were a wonderful professor. She was very fond of you. So, but yes, she had mentioned that you have written a bunch of books, and I've also written some books. And the reason I decided to start this channel, you're actually my guinea pig. This is my first interview on here. Okay. The reason I decided to do it because it's actually very difficult to kind of get into. For me, it's the self-promotion actually that's really tough.
Yeah.
But I thought it'd be nice to talk to authors, not only twofold purpose. Number one, to promote your work, and number two, to help people that are looking in on learning the ins and outs of publication and writing and all that sort of thing.
Yes.
Yeah. So I understand you spent many years in Peru.
That's correct.
And that's the basis for a lot of what I read. Do you want to tell us about that?
My wife and I went as missionaries from Britain to Latin America in the 60s and spent the next 30 odd years basically in Peru, working in very rural areas. We were 7 years in a jungle tribe. We were another, I don't know, 10 years or so up in the Andes amongst Quechua-speaking people. And then, like many missionaries, we became cannon fodder for seminaries and other places because we're cheap to employ in foreign countries. And I became a lecturer in Latin American church history and mission studies. And so that was my connection, really, in Latin America.
Okay. And you were there, 30 years, right? So some of what I was reading of yours were stories of living down there, but I wasn't clear. Correct. Are these true stories or are they fictionalized?
They're fictionalized, but the facts are basic. For example, in the book is called Not to Come, is the story about the massive ecological and cultural changes that occurred in the Amazon basin area, where whole tribal groups have disappeared, where the forest has disappeared. And that was a way of characterizing it in a fiction form.
Yeah.
But the facts in the book are right. Another book is based on the facts of the social revolution in the 60s, 68, when the agrarian reform happened and the military took over in Peru. And it's also interwoven with the period which was very difficult to live in Peru and other places, with the terrorist movement, Shining Pathway, and the FARC movement in Colombia and things. And that was one of the reasons for leaving Peru, that I apparently had this post-traumatic stress syndrome thing, because I lost a good number of friends and was intimidated, not by the terrorists, but by the military, who rather suspected me of being a Marxist, where they didn't understand that Christianity was also fairly revolutionary.
That is kind of the main reason you had to leave then eventually?
Yeah, I left and then we were over in Canada and for a couple of years, and oh my goodness, what's that province next to Saskatchewan again?
Alberta?
No,
Manitoba, depending which way you're going.
Yeah, Manitoba, the place where you don't call the police if you lost your dog for
Okay.
4 days because you can still see it.
Yeah, yeah. I've driven through there.
Yeah. And that's where I met this other person that you were talking about.
Okay. Oh, wonderful. Yeah, and I noticed one of the books you had was actually about settling in Saskatchewan.
Yeah,
So that
my
was
yeah, that is based on fact as well. My two granduncles went as homesteaders in Saskatchewan in about 1901 to a place called Mullingar, which is still there. It's about two shacks north of North Battleford. They walked in from North Battleford 40 miles to claim the land. And it's the story of their lives that I learned most of it through one of their daughters who was 90 years old and lived in a massive town called Crystal City, population 93 in Manitoba. So yeah, that was based on that. And another book of mine is the story of my great-grandfather, who was a sailing captain who went back and forward in the 1880s from Scotland to Nova Scotia and Newfoundland, and eventually bumped into some rocks in Wales and was drowned along with his son. So that again is a novelistic way of presenting facts about just how hard life was.
yeah. Yeah, anyways, that's one of the things I noticed. One of the things that draw me into what I read of your work was just personal stories. I think makes a really good connection with the reader. Even if it's fictionalized, it's really hard to write something without part of you coming out of it. Like
Well, absolutely.
I write fiction exclusively, but every part of it is something that came from my life or my observation or my
Yeah.
experience. Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
I'd say the same. I mean, my latest book of poems and stories comes out of the anguish of my wife passing away at the beginning of the year. And one of the ways that I came to terms with grief and separation and things was when it got too much, I would sit down and write a poem.
yeah.
And that's the way it came out for me. So it is, my stuff is all based on personal recollections and reflections. I don't.
I had. Oh, sorry, I didn't want to interrupt there.
No, go
I
ahead.
had one specific question because one of the ones I was reading, it's one I was really wondering is like if there's this a fictionalized account or an actual thing that happened to you. It's a very simple one, but it was about you were driving, I think it was in Peru, driving from one location to another. And I guess the bus driver had to stop in a city. He said there were technical difficulties with the vehicle. And
Oh
it turned
yeah.
out he was just going to his like niece's quinceañera or something like that.
No, that's 100% solid.
Okay, so that happened to you. I
I,
can't remember
I
which book it was, unfortunately.
yeah, I think it was in was it well, anyway. That was just one of many events.
Yeah.
I did a lot of traveling on buses in the 70s and 80s in Peru, and you never quite knew when you were going to get there or if you were going to get there.
Yeah.
And the number of accidents on the roads because of the state of the roads and the state of the buses. And timetables were an invention of the Western world and really had nothing to do with actual transport.
Right.
And so, yeah, all these things are based on actual factual things. I nearly died on one bus just because I had an asthma attack at 12,500 feet. And then other buses with other sorts of problems. And we had our own pickup as well, where you carried two 50-gallon drums of fuel, two spare wheels and tires, a whole toolkit, and a lot of other kit as well. And we used to lay our kids out overnight at the side of the road on a big mattress. And they all slept gazing at the stars.
Oh, nice.
At 15,500 feet.
Yeah.
I mean, these were just, we didn't think of it as odd. It was just the way life was.
That's what I sensed. I sensed that it felt like a true story. It's a true thing that happened. I just wasn't sure.
Yeah.
I lost my follow-up question, but that's okay.
Okay.
So I kind of want to move into the publishing end. I noticed a couple of books I looked at were published. Publisher was listed as Mac Research.
Yes.
Is that self-published or is that
Yeah, that's self-publishing.
okay?
That was our name from 86 onwards because we felt that we wanted to identify more directly with the church in Latin America and not be, as it were, funded by a missionary society and everything. And also I was a postgraduate. I just started a postgraduate department of mission studies. And so we had to have some kind of cover, and we called ourselves Mac Research because I was McIntosh for one
Right.
thing, but the other thing was Mission and Church Research.
Yeah. Okay, so it's a double meaning there.
Yeah, so we published under that name.
Yeah.
We had our own, as it were, in those days, the ISBN number.
Yeah.
So that gave us credibility of the books, and we had to send a copy to all the receiving libraries in Britain. That's like Oxford, Cambridge, Edinburgh, and Wales. So that the books, I felt that was a way of, as it were, anchoring your publications in the academic and the book world.
So is that about when you started writing? You said about 1985 there. Is that when you first started in general?
Yeah, yes, I would say so.
Okay.
I mean, obviously I had to write stuff in Latin America.
Yeah, I saw some of your books were in Spanish.
Yeah, prior to that, I mean, I wrote a book that doesn't appear. It's called Introduction to Latin American Missiology. That was the first textbook on the subject in Latin America. And then I wrote another book called La Otra Crónica de Peru, which is a biographical account of our life from 65 through to 93. And I wrote it in Spanish because it was more relevant to folks in Latin America to know what we have been up to rather than folks in other parts of the world.
So I feel like you might just be the exact right person to ask here then. How has the face of self-publishing changed from 1985 to the present?
Oh, massively. And it's not many people that are thankful for Amazon, but and Kindle. I mean, I started with kind of steam publications, like little booklets like that we printed on our own printer and stapled and just handed out to anybody who was daft enough to want to read them. And then we moved to actually paying for somebody to publish 200 copies of, well, for example, Mullingar, but we didn't have the money, and that was the hindrance to publishing, that you had to have the money up front before you ever got it back. And if you were like me, you kept on handing out books and saying, you ought to read this, and so you never got your money back. And then along came Amazon Kindle, and where you could upload your script and everything and design your covers. And then it was, they did the printing on demand. And although you never made a fortune, I mean, I got, in English money, I got 79 pence this month for publications. You will not make a fortune, but at least it takes the burden off you of having $2,000 or $3,000 to pay up front to get your stuff published. So that's been the massive change. And now you can control the universe by just keep publishing anything.
I feel like that was a bit of a trade-off, is that Amazon made it a lot easier, but at the same time, because it's easier, so many more people can do it. That, you're kind of swimming in an ocean of, there's a lot more competition.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And silly me didn't often look to see on Amazon if the title of your book was actually replicated by another 50 people.
Yeah.
So some of your books, you have to, as it were, promote them not through their title, which was probably something that happened earlier on. But now you ought to be a bit more careful in thinking about the title of your book, because somebody like J.K. Rowling will probably have a title of a book identical to yours.
Yeah.
So you'll be lost in a sea of publications.
Yeah. So I was never involved in publication before all of this, because I'm relatively new. So I never experienced the front end where you're having to print them yourselves.
Yeah.
So I'm just entering in the new technological age.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, it's a big struggle I've had is
It's
promotion.
fun. It's part of the creativity.
Yeah, I
Of the
like
book.
not having the gatekeepers, because originally I was dedicated to doing traditional publishing, like making sure I went through an agent.
Yeah.
But in my genre of writing, they told me that you had to have a love triangle in your story. It was the industry standard. And as soon as I heard that, I was like, no, I'm just going to do it myself. So
Yeah.
I appreciate being able to do what I want.
Exactly. And if you are a writer, you believe that what you put on paper is totally infallible and
Well,
absolutely brilliant. And you need a wife or somebody like I had, who says, you can't say that. Or don't you know about commas? Or it is helpful to have somebody who kind of does a bit of editing of your
yeah.
work, which Amazon doesn't particularly do, although some of the more modern technology probably does away with the grossest of errors. But,
Yeah. So I guess that's, if for viewers' sake, probably something worth looking out for is editing.
yeah.
If you're not really confident in, even if you're a good editor, it's very difficult for an editor to edit their own work.
Yes, exactly. I have to confess, I'm not a good editor, but my wife was amazing, and I've got two daughters now who say, "Oh, Dad, this is awful," and so that is a help.
Yeah. Yeah, I do a writing workshop every week with a friend, and we go over each other's stuff and kind of do that as well for each other. So very helpful to have a second set of eyes on it.
Yeah, well, the Lord bless you, but I'm afraid that to me, get the stuff down on paper,
Yeah,
and that's it, and I am satisfied.
no, that's great. That's perfect. Yeah, I really think it's opened up a lot of opportunities for a lot of people.
Yeah, well,
But
absolutely.
yeah, it just makes the promotion element that much tougher, right? Getting yourself.
And I've been trying to
seen.
encourage so many Latin Americans
Yeah,
to voice their experience, because that has been a voice that has been muzzled and muffled by the fact that the costs have just been prohibitive for an ordinary person prior to Amazon.
Do you find you have a good response from Latin America with your Spanish books?
Yes, a reason. I mean, they're fairly specific in their contents. And I, during the period of the Shining Pathway Terrace movement, I published pamphlets, inflammatory pamphlets, which I just handed out.
Yeah.
And they're around still, and people look back at the terrible things that I said, not so much about the terrorists, but about President Fujimori.
Interesting.
And
Do you still have copies of that?
Yeah, well, I would have copies somewhere.
Yeah.
I mean,
I feel like in a historical context, those still might be very interesting to.
Yeah. No, that's another thing that I've always been interested in archiving stuff.
Yeah.
And in can't remember offhand, I could look for it, about 1990, our idea was to put all our archives. We had all our letters that we'd written to our parents over the 30 years. We had a whole collections of this, that, and the next thing about the growth and development of the church in Latin America. We had a whole scad of stuff. And the idea that that was going to go into what was called in those days the Center of Studies of Christianity in the non-Western world, which is centered on Edinburgh University in Scotland. But that, like many other centers, imploded because they're heavily dependent on financing. And then suddenly we got a letter through the door saying, from the National Library of Scotland, saying we're opening a new archive on curious Scots. And we believe you have this archive of, I forget how many, 1,000 pages of stuff. Would you be interested in depositing it in the National Library of Scotland? And we will give you all the special folders, papers, and everything else. So we did that. So that's there for posterity.
Oh, right on.
Letters, all that stuff. And I've always encouraged our students to think about that as well, because that period of their life is probably one of the more interesting periods. I always kept a diary ever since. I've got all my diaries from 80 years of age up until now. And that is a source of, especially for the one where I did my biography. I look back and find shock, horror. Did I do this or did I say that? Yeah, so I think that's important as well, that you do keep. I mean, it used to be very in colleges in Canada and the States. You used to have to journal, didn't you?
Not in school.
All right.
We may have done it in elementary school.
Right.
For the first couple of years, but not that much.
Okay. Right, because that's a great thing. If you could encourage a child to.
Well, do you know what my parents did that was really cool was they kept a family journal every week for each of the kids. So I actually have a record of when I was like 1, 2 years old.
Yeah.
You know, and that's actually really cool. Yeah. Anyways, we only have about 2 minutes here.
Okay.
Is there anything you want to say to finish up?
No, I would just say that the best way of starting is just to start and sit down at your computer or with a pen and paper, if you still use STEAM technology, and write something. I mean, I never know how my poems are going to come out. I usually get the first 2 lines. There was a boy called Bryant who was quite a giant. And then I never know where it might.
I already love it.
I never know where it'll end up.
Yeah.
And all my writing is a mystery to me. I couldn't tell you for the life of me what's in most of my books.
Yeah.
No idea.
You got quite a few, though. I was kind of impressed when I was looking through. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and they've come out, I think, of just a life experience and the need to communicate that a Christian life isn't a boring, behind the walls kind of experience.
Right.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for taking some time to talk to me here.
You're welcome.
Again, you are my guinea pig, so I'm just hoping on the technical end everything works out. But
that's okay.
Yeah.
Fine. Do what you like.
All right, perfect. Well, thank you very much. All right, have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Yeah.